The bowl slipped before she even realized it. Steam hissed upward as hot soup splashed across the crisp white shirt of the man seated at the head of the corner table. The clatter of porcelain on tile echoed like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, the restaurant froze. Every fork stopped halfway to a mouth. Every conversation cut short. All eyes turned toward her, the young black waitress, standing stiff with horror, an empty tray trembling in her hands. She braced herself for what was coming. The man was unmistakable, a millionaire known for his arrogance, the kind who tipped only when it suited him and treated staff like furniture. The staff near the bar already winced, some ducking their heads, others mouthing silent prayers. They expected him to erupt, to sneer, to demand she be fired on the spot. But he didn't shout. He didn't shove his chair back in a theatrical rage. Instead, he stayed seated, the liquid dripping slowly down his tailored suit, and looked at her. His eyes, sharp and assessing, locked onto hers like a hawk studying prey. She felt the air leave her lungs under the weight of that gaze. For a moment, she thought he might explode after all, but the anger never came. Her instinct took over. She rushed to grab napkins, muttering apologies that stumbled over her tongue. The tray clattered as she set it aside, and she dabbed at the table, careful not to touch him, careful to stay professional even as humiliation seared her cheeks. He didn't move. He didn't swat her hand away. He didn't even look at the ruined meal in front of him. His focus never shifted from her face. "Sir, I'm so sorry," she managed, her voice quiet but steady. She expected a cutting remark, a cruel laugh, maybe even a demand to see the manager. But he leaned back in his chair instead, droplets still glistening on his lapel, and tilted his head as though she'd surprised him. The silence stretched long enough to make her throat tighten. Around them, whispers grew. Other customers waited for the spectacle. The staff behind the bar peeked nervously over the counter. Then, to everyone's shock, he gave a short laugh. Not warm, not kind, but amused. "Well," he said finally, his voice low enough to force the room to lean closer. "That was unexpected." She blinked, caught off guard, unsure if he was mocking her or not. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and his gaze softened, just slightly. "Most people don't get that close to me." She didn't know how to answer. Heat rose to her face as she gathered the broken pieces of her composure. She excused herself quickly, retreating toward the kitchen, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might echo off the walls. Behind her, the room exhaled, the tension loosening like a rope cut free. But one thing was clear. Instead of fury, he had seen something in her, and that look, the kind that lingered long after the moment passed, unsettled her more than any anger ever could. The kitchen door swung shut behind her, cutting off the weight of the dining room. Her chest rose and fell too quickly, the sting of humiliation still warm in her cheeks. She grabbed a towel, wiped her trembling hands, and forced herself to breathe evenly. The manager rushed over, whispering sharply about being more careful, about how dangerous it was to upset a man like that. She nodded, but inside she knew she had to face him again. She could not hide in the kitchen all night. So she squared her shoulders, balanced a fresh glass of water on her tray, and walked back toward the table. Each step felt heavier, the hum of diners resuming their chatter buzzing faintly in her ears. When she reached him, he was still seated, his shirt stained but his posture relaxed, almost as though nothing had happened. His eyes flicked up at her, expectant. "Sir," she began, her voice steady though her stomach nodded, "I owe you a proper apology. It was careless of me." She kept her gaze on his face, refusing to let shame drag her eyes downward. The easy thing would have been to mutter an apology and scurry away, but something in her refused to bow. He raised an eyebrow, smirking slightly as if amused by her composure. "Most people," he said slowly, "would be falling over themselves right now, begging not to lose their job." His tone carried an edge, testing her. "I am sorry for what happened," she replied, standing straighter. "But I will not beg. I made a mistake, and I am capable of owning it. That's all." The firmness in her voice caught him off guard. He studied her more closely now, tilting his head as if trying to understand what kind of waitress stood in front of him. Around them, the restaurant carried on, but for a moment the noise seemed to fade. There was a tension in the air, a pull between them, neither quite willing to look away. Her hands were steady now, gripping the tray. She set down the water with a soft clink and folded the towel neatly over her arm. "If there is anything else I can do for you this evening, please let me know," she added, her tone still respectful but lined with quiet pride. He tapped a finger against the table, his lips curving into something not quite a smile. "Interesting," he murmured. "You don't scare easily." She didn't answer. She only inclined her head, waiting a beat before stepping back. Inside, her heart hammered, but outwardly, she remained calm. He could take her measure all he wanted. She would not be reduced to just a mistake on his shirt. As she walked away, she could feel his eyes following her, curiosity stirring where arrogance had been. And though she tried to focus on her other tables, she knew something had shifted. What intrigued him wasn't the accident, but the way she refused to bend. The restaurant was quieter than usual when she saw him again. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows, glinting off polished cutlery and half-empty glasses of iced tea. She had just finished wiping down a table when the host approached her with a small nod, gesturing toward the door. She followed the motion and froze for the briefest second. He was back. The same man whose shirt she had drenched in soup the night before, now in a different tailored suit, walking in as though the place belonged to him. He didn't even glance at the menu when he was seated. Instead, he looked straight at her and said evenly, "I'll wait for her section." The host glanced at her, surprised, but she schooled her features into calm neutrality and walked over. She had no intention of making a scene, and if he wanted to sit in her section, so be it. "What can I get you today, sir?" she asked, voice steady. "Coffee," he said. "Black. And maybe a little conversation." She ignored the second request, scribbling the order neatly onto her pad. But when she returned with the cup, he leaned forward slightly, eyes not on the coffee but on her. "What's your name?" She considered lying, brushing him off with the formality customers usually demanded. But something in his tone wasn't arrogant this time. It was curious, deliberate, searching. "Danielle," she said finally. "Danielle," he repeated, as if trying the shape of it. "Do you work here full-time?" "I work," she said carefully, "where I need to." He chuckled quietly at her guardedness, sipping the coffee. "Fair. But you carry yourself differently, like you don't belong to this place." She bristled at the phrasing. "I belong exactly where I choose to stand," she replied. The edge in her voice was quiet but sharp enough to draw a flicker of respect in his eyes. From then on, each visit followed the same pattern. He asked for her section, ordered something simple, and started asking questions. At first, she answered with clipped words, keeping the walls high. She wasn't about to indulge some wealthy man's curiosity just because he found her intriguing after a clumsy accident. Yet his persistence was not the kind she expected. He didn't shower her with compliments or boast about his wealth. Instead, he asked about her favorite books, whether she preferred jazz or blues if she had ever traveled. She found herself, against her better judgment, giving him fragments of herself. Little truths. She told him her mother loved old gospel records, that she worked double shifts because her younger brother still needed help with school. She never revealed too much, but every answer seemed to push him further away from the arrogant figure she first met, and closer to something quieter, something human. The staff whispered about his returns, curious why a man like him would bother coming back again and again for coffee and simple meals. Danielle brushed them off, keeping her focus on her work. Yet she couldn't ignore the feeling that with each visit, the balance between them shifted. What began as an accident was turning into something else entirely, something she wasn't sure she wanted but couldn't quite step away from. The Friday evening rush filled the restaurant with the familiar noise of clinking silverware and impatient voices rising above the music. Danielle balanced plates with practiced ease, weaving through tables with the calm efficiency of someone who had long ago learned to tune out both praise and insult. She was midway through serving a couple when a sharp voice cut across the room. "Is this really the best they can hire here?" a man sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. He was red-faced, suited, and clearly several drinks past courtesy. He jabbed a finger at Danielle as she passed his table, complaining loudly enough for half the dining room to hear. Slow service, and now this attitude? Unbelievable. Danielle stiffened but kept her posture professional. She set down the last plate for her table and turned back toward him with measured calm. "Sir, if there's an issue with your order, I can fix it," she said, her voice even. She had learned long ago not to let her expression betray how often she faced this kind of treatment. But before the customer could snap again, another voice rose, smooth and commanding. "That's enough." Every head turned. The millionaire, seated in Danielle's section as he had been all week, had stood from his table. His presence carried weight even when silent, and now his words silenced the entire floor. His gaze locked on the rude man, with a coldness that didn't need to be raised in volume to cut deep. "You've had enough drinks to forget your manners," he continued, stepping closer. "But this woman does her job with more grace in one evening than most men carry in a lifetime. If you can't see that, the fault isn't hers." The room froze, disbelief hanging heavy. No one had ever seen him speak on behalf of anyone but himself. Danielle's chest tightened, her fingers gripping the tray as she tried to process what was happening. The rude man sputtered, cheeks darkening. "Do you know who I am?" The millionaire leaned forward, his voice like ice. "Do you know who I am?" He returned evenly, and the challenge in his eyes left no room for argument. The drunk man shifted back into his chair, muttering into his glass, suddenly much smaller than before. Around the room, the staff exchanged looks of shock. They had grown used to seeing the millionaire as someone untouchable, untouchably cruel even, the type who watched others stumble without a second thought. Yet here he was, using his influence to shield her, not humiliate her. Danielle met his eyes briefly. His expression was unreadable, but there was something there, not pity, not amusement, but a quiet respect that unsettled her more than the confrontation itself. She gave a small nod and moved on, pretending her heart wasn't pounding. The night carried on, but the air had shifted. For the first time, his presence in her section didn't feel like an intrusion. It felt like a line had been crossed, and what lay on the other side was something neither of them had expected. The shift between them happened quietly, almost invisibly, like a thread tightening day by day until one tug would make the whole fabric pull together. What began as nothing more than an accident in a crowded restaurant had turned into a rhythm neither of them had planned. He kept returning, always to her section, always with that watchful expression that seemed to catch every small detail. Danielle noticed the way his eyes lingered, not when she made mistakes, but when she handled difficulties with grace. He watched her carry too many plates at once with perfect balance. He watched her navigate rude customers with unshaken calm. He watched her leave each shift with shoulders straight even when exhaustion weighed them down. She was not the type of woman who bent under pressure, and that fascinated him more than any fine art piece or business deal he owned. For her part, she kept him at arm's length, polite, professional, quick with her service, but never eager to linger. She reminded herself he was a customer, a man of means, who could upend her life with a word. And yet, slowly, she began to see glimpses of someone different from the reputation that trailed him. He stopped mocking. He stopped snapping. Instead, he asked questions, sometimes small ones, about her day, sometimes bigger ones, that caught her off guard. He listened, truly listened, in a way that few ever did. One evening, when a storm rattled the windows and most of the tables were empty, he lingered long after finishing his meal. He sat with his coffee untouched, watching the rain. Danielle came by to clear his plate, and instead of leaving, he asked softly, "Do you ever think about what you'd do if you weren't here?" She hesitated, tray in hand, then gave an honest answer about wanting more than survival, about her brother's schooling, about her mother who worked too hard. To her surprise, he didn't dismiss it. He nodded, as though every word mattered. She caught herself thinking about those conversations later, long after her shift ended, not about his wealth, not about his influence, but about how his attention made her feel seen in ways that both unsettled and comforted her. The staff whispered, of course. They noticed the way he looked at her, the way his arrogance softened whenever she was near. They joked that he had finally found someone who didn't flinch at his name, someone who refused to play by his rules of intimidation. Danielle ignored the gossip, but deep inside, she knew they weren't entirely wrong. The millionaire, for all his polish and power, found himself drawn back again and again, not to the luxury of the restaurant or the status of being recognized, but to her steady pride. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't dazzled by him, and that truth unsettled him more than anything. What began as spilled soup had become a connection he couldn't shake. She had entered his world by accident, but she refused to shrink in it. And because of that, he found himself thinking about her long after he left the table, long after the restaurant lights dimmed, long after the stain on his shirt was gone.